Hello and welcome to Psyched, and this is part 2 of series 1, and we are studying Introduction to Psychology. In the last video, we did the definition of psychology and the three historical perspectives, that is structuralism, functionalism, behaviorism. And in this video, we'll discuss another very important historical perspective, that is the psychodynamic approach. So, let's get started. Before we actually start discussing the psychodynamic approach, I would like to make a note here. The terms that we use, psychodynamic approach, psychodynamic perspective, or psychodynamic view, they are all interchangeable terms. View, perspective, approaches, they mean the same thing. So before you get confused, I have informed you right here. Let us now start discussing the psychodynamic approach. The first person to propagate the psychodynamic approach was Sigmund Freud. He is a very important person in the history of psychology. Sigmund Freud's theory is called the psychodynamic theory. Sometimes we also get confused between the terms psychodynamic and psychoanalytic. So this whole perspective is called the psychodynamic perspective, but the theory given by Sigmund Freud is called the psychoanalytic theory, or sometimes the psychoanalytic approach. In this part of the video, we are discussing only this approach because it is a long one and we need to discuss it in detail because it is very important from the perspective of an examination, and also it lays the foundation stone for further psychological concepts. So, as I told, we have the propagator of psychoanalytical theory, Sigmund Freud. Here we will discuss 4 key concepts given by Sigmund Freud. First is the levels of consciousness. Second, structure of personality. Third, the psychosexual stages of development. Fourth, anxiety and defense mechanisms. So what is the primary belief of psychoanalytical theory? According to Freud, the human behavior is driven by inner, hidden, and repressed sexual and aggressive urges. These might seem some heavy terms. Let us make it easier for ourselves. So he meant to say that some of the things that are unacceptable by the society, especially our sexual and aggressive impulses, thoughts, and urges, that are hidden from ourselves. They are unknown to us as well. And he says that these repressed urges are what define our behavior. Freud is the one who also stressed upon the importance of childhood experiences that shape our behavior in the future. Let's get into the details of the first concept given by Freud. That is the levels of consciousness. So according to Freud, our mind is like an iceberg. And we know that 90% of the portion of iceberg is under the water. Only 10% of it is visible on the outside. Similarly, only 10% of our mind is visible to us. Rest of it lies beneath the surface and is largely unknown to us. The portion of the water that we see in this diagram right here is the conscious. This includes our current thoughts and feelings. The portion beneath the conscious is this pre-conscious. This contains the knowledge and our memories that can readily be brought to conscious when required. Another portion that is entirely beneath the surface and is hidden and repressed is the unconscious. The unconscious portion of a mind has the unacceptable thoughts, desires, urges, and impulses. This can contain the fears, sexual or aggressive urges that are unacceptable in the society. And the interesting fact is that we ourselves are unaware of our unconscious. We'll discuss the role of these as we move further on other concepts. Next, we see a second concept, the structure of personality. For this also, we return to our iceberg diagram. Now, as we know that Freud has divided the mind into three portions: conscious, preconscious, and unconscious. He has divided the human personality also into three parts. First is id. It is the innate or internal urges or the primary urges that are present right from birth. We see the word here primitive. This means primary. These are primary urges. These are our bodily needs that we want to satisfy, and they are driven by the sexual and aggressive urges. According to Freud, it is based on the pleasure principle, and these urges demand immediate satisfaction, that they need to be satisfied. These are some of the destructive urges that want our attention and want to be immediately satisfied. And id is entirely in the unconscious portion of the mind, as we see here. This is something important for us to remember. That first, that it is the primitive urge. Second, it is entirely in the unconscious. And third, that id is based on the pleasure principle. Second is ego. Ego is intermediary between id and superego. That means it creates a balance between the two of them. And therefore we say that it is based on the reality principle. It takes into account the external condition and only then allows the gratification of the urges of the id. Right? It directs the behavior so as to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. So this is what keeps a control over both id and superego. And and ego lies in the conscious and the preconscious portions of the mind. Last is superego. It is like our conscience. It will tell us the rules that should be followed, what should be done and what should not be done. So we can say that it is based on the morality principle. So if it is not morally correct to gratify impulses, it will not allow it to do so. But as we said earlier, it is actually the ego that balances both superego and id. So it depends on the ego whether it will allow superego to satisfy its rules and allow it to satisfy its urges. And superego lies in the preconscious and the unconscious portions of the mind. So this was all about the structure of personality. Let us move on to the third concept given by Sigmund Freud: the psychosexual stages of development. According to him, there are the stages that every child undergoes. In each of the stages, libidinal energy or libido is spent. Libido is the psychic energy that runs through all our mental activities. And it is said that it is closely related to the pleasure at each of the developmental level. If too less or too much of this energy is spent, then fixation may occur. Now, what is fixation? Too less or excessive investment of psychic energy in any particular stage of psychosexual development is called fixation. So either overindulgence or less indulgence, that is frustration, can lead to fixation if there's a conflict in the psychosexual stage that is not resolved. We will be able to understand this further as we study each of the stages. The first is the oral stage. Here we need to remember the years in which it occurs. A child between 0 to 2 years undergoes this stage, and a child derives pleasure from his mouth, like by sucking a bottle, sucking the thumb, or by sucking the nipple. So we can say that the erogenous zone in this stage is the mouth. And according to Freud, if less gratification occurs in this stage, it leads to over-dependency and aggressive personality as the child grows up. While if too much gratification occurs, a child engages in overeating or drinking too much, nail biting, or might have a hostile personality. Right? The next stage is the anal stage. This is from 2 to 4 years. In this stage, the child's erogenous zone or the pleasurable zone is the anus. So the child derives pleasure by either holding back or passing the stool. Overindulgence in this stage can lead to undisciplined and aggressive personality due to lack of toilet training. And on the other hand, personality of child may become highly orderly and perfectionist who loves cleanliness. So that would be the effect of fixation in this stage. The next stage is the phallic stage. We must remember the age in which it occurs, which is 4 to 7 years. And in this stage, child derives pleasure from his or her genitals by manipulating the genitals. There are two things that Freud talked about in this stage that are very important: the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex. According to Freud, what happens is that a boy starts having sexual feelings for his mother, and he then fears his father that he would get to know, and he would be punished or would be castrated, and this is called Oedipus complex. And this fear of getting castrated is called castration anxiety. Similarly, in girls, they are attached to their father and start hating their mother for depriving them of the penis. So that is Electra complex. We can understand this through this flow chart. So suppose we take the boy. He is sexually attracted towards his mother and is jealous towards his father, and this develops a fear and castration anxiety in him, and therefore gradually they give up their sexual desire for their mothers and ultimately see their fathers as their role model. And similarly for girls, they start seeing their mothers as their role model. I hope that would be clear enough to understand what happens in the Oedipus and the Electra complex. Let us now go on the fourth psychosexual stage, which is latency stage. This is from 7 years till the child reaches puberty. In this stage, the sexual feelings are actually repressed, and the children prefer to stay with their same-sex friends. And the last stage is the genital stage, and this begins after puberty. And now the teenager is attracted towards opposite sex, and those repressed feelings actually returns. Okay, so these were the stages given by Freud. Finally, we have come to the last concept given by Freud, which is anxiety and defense mechanisms. To understand the concept, let us check out this flowchart. So, like we discussed, id and ego might get into a conflict as the urges or the unacceptable motives of id might try to come out into the conscious. Hence, there is a possibility that id goes out of control, causing a conflict, and this leads to anxiety. To deal with this anxiety, ego uses various defense mechanisms. We will now discuss some important defense mechanisms. First is repression, suppressing painful or unacceptable memories and thoughts. That is pushing down the painful memories. For example, when a child who might have been scolded by a teacher at school forgets the school's name or that teacher's name completely later on, he pushes down those painful memories in the unconscious. It makes it easier to understand these defense mechanisms with example, and therefore we do it that way. The next is projection, attributing one's own thoughts, feelings, and motives to another. For example, you may dislike your new co-worker, but instead of accepting that, you choose to tell yourself that they dislike you. You see in their actions the things you wish you could do or say. Third is displacement, redirecting an emotional response from a dangerous object to a safer one. For example, when a man comes home from office after getting scolded by his boss, so he is frustrated, but he cannot take this anger out on the boss. So he scolds his child or his wife at home because they are a less threatening target. Next is regression, responding to a threatening situation in a way which is appropriate to an earlier stage of development. These might seem to be heavy terms, but let's understand it. This means responding to a situation in a way that was only appropriate to a younger age. For example, a man who is very stressed comes home and throws a tantrum or sits in a way like a child sits. So, this is something that is appropriate to a child and not to an adult. This is regression. Next is rationalization, creating false but acceptable excuses to justify behavior. For instance, there is a whole chocolate cake and you want to eat it, but that cake is for the whole class. And then you eat it, and then your teacher asks you, why did you eat it? And you say, I thought that it is summer, so let me eat the whole cake, otherwise it will get spoiled. That is giving an excuse to justify your behavior. This is rationalization. Next is sublimation. Threatening impulses are rechanneled in a way that is acceptable. For instance, a person experiences extreme anger, but he cannot take this anger out on someone, so he takes up boxing as a means to vent out this frustration, this anger. And then we have reaction formation, behaving in a way that is opposite to one's true feeling. For instance, one may feel that they should not express negative emotions such as anger or frustration. So instead they react in a overly positive way, something that is opposite to one's own actual original feelings. So that was the end of the 4 main concepts given by Freud. And in the short run, these defense mechanisms might work, but in the long run, they are unhealthy. They shouldn't be used. They are just to deal with the anxiety in the short run. There are a few methods given by Freud that are very important for us to discuss. And this is how Freud said that we can deal with this anxiety or any kind of mental disorder. First is free association. So whenever Freud's patient came with some mental health issue, he used to engage them in free association, that is allowing them to freely express themselves and speak whatever comes to their mind, how much ever harsh or painful it may be. According to him, it reduced the anxiety of the individual and may even lead to the resolution of the conflict between the id and ego of that person. Second is dream analysis. According to Freud, dreams were the disguised form of the repressed desires, motives, and urges of an individual. So, analyzing a dream by a trained professional could give a way to understand the conflict of the individual. And this, Freud said, could lead to the resolution of conflicts and also the resolution of mental disorders. There are two other concepts, that is transference and the counter transference, and we'll discuss that later. So, I know it must have been very lengthy for everyone, so do not overload yourself with these concepts. Go slow, understand each one of them well, and then move on to the next one. As the end of this video, to complete the psychodynamic approach, we have one last thing up left, that is the Neo-Freudians. Neo-Freudians are psychologists who accept the basic portions of Freud's theory but have modified the others. Some of the famous Neo-Freudians are mentioned here: Karen Horney, Alfred Adler, Carl Jung, Erik Erikson. I will upload the details of the works of each of the Neo-Freudians in a separate video. Till then, just remember these names, and we'll meet in part 3 of the series. Till then, stay tuned. Goodbye.